The delivery girl was humiliated for arriving late, and the millionaire saw her bracelet, the same one he bought at a local market the day he lost his daughter 23 years ago. The rain hammered Chicago's streets like bullets against concrete, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces that seemed to mirror Rachel Bennett's scattered thoughts. She pulled her worn leather jacket tighter around her shoulders, the zipper fighting her as she balanced 3 steaming bags of Thai food on her left arm, while wrestling with her phone's cracked screen. Come on, she muttered, watching the GPS recalculate her route for the 3rd time. The accident on Michigan Avenue had turned downtown into a parking lot, and she was already 20 minutes behind schedule. 20 minutes that could cost her the job she desperately needed to keep at 27. Rachel had learned that life didn't hand out second chances. You had to steal them, growing up bouncing between foster homes after aging out of St. Mary's Orphanage had taught her that much. Nobody cared about your sob story when rent was due, and landlords didn't accept explanations about traffic jams as payment. She ducked into the revolving door of Crawford Industries, water dripping from her dark hair onto the pristine marble floor. The lobby screamed money, the kind of old money that built cities and crushed dreams with equal indifference. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above her head, and the echo of her worn sneakers against the marble made her feel like she was announcing her own inadequacy to the world. "Excuse me, you can't be in here," snapped a security guard whose uniform probably cost more than Rachel's monthly grocery budget. His badge read, "Williams," in polished gold letters. "Food delivery for Mr. Crawford's office," Rachel said, holding up the bags. The aroma of pad thai and green curry wafted between them. Seemingly out of place in this temple of corporate power, Williams looked her up and down like she was something he'd scrape off his shoe. "Service elevators around back. You people should know better than to use the main entrance." You people. The words hit her like a slap. But Rachel had developed thick skin over the years. She'd heard worse from better people, and she wasn't about to let some rent-a-cop with a power trip ruin her day more than it already was. The customer specifically requested main elevator access. She lied smoothly. Sometimes survival meant bending the truth until it snapped, before Williams could argue. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Rachel stepped inside. The 40th floor couldn't come fast enough. The executive level was a different world entirely. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Chicago that made the city look manageable, tamed. Rachel had never seen her hometown from this height. Up here, the streets where she fought for every dollar looked like toy roads, and the people were just moving dots with no stories, no struggles, no dreams deferred. "Can I help you?" The receptionist's voice could have frozen hell itself. Everything about her was sharp. Her blazer, her bob cut, her expression. Her nameplate read, "Jennifer Morrison, Executive Assistant. Food delivery for Mr. Crawford." Jennifer's perfectly manicured eyebrows rose in practiced disdain. Mr. Crawford didn't order any food. Rachel's heart sank. This was exactly the kind of mix-up that could get her fired. "Are you sure? I have the order right here." She fumbled with her phone, nearly dropping the food bags in the process. "I handle all of Mr. Crawford's appointments and requests. There's been a mistake." Jennifer's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You'll need to leave immediately. Please, just let me double-check the address." "Security." Jennifer's voice cut through the air like a knife. This was it. Rachel could feel her job slipping away, along with her apartment, her fragile stability, everything she'd worked so hard to build from nothing. The familiar panic started creeping up her throat. The same feeling she'd had as a 4-year-old kid wandering the streets alone, not knowing her own name or where she belonged. Her hand instinctively went to the silver bracelet on her wrist, the only thing that had been with her since the beginning. The heart-shaped charm was worn smooth from years of nervous touching, but she could still make out the faint engraving that had never made sense. "Forever, Daddy. What seems to be the problem here?" The voice was deep, authoritative, but not unkind. Rachel looked up to see a man in his early 50s striding toward them, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than she made in 6 months. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Gray-blue, like a storm over Lake Michigan, and filled with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. Daniel Crawford looked every inch the billionaire CEO, but there was something about him that seemed familiar. Rachel couldn't put her finger on it. "Mr. Crawford," Jennifer stammered. This person claims she has a food delivery for you, but it's fine, Jennifer. Daniel's gaze hadn't left Rachel's face. What restaurant? Lotus Garden on State Street, Rachel said, her voice smaller than she intended. Order for Crawford, Daniel, pad thai, green curry, spring rolls. Daniel's expression shifted, confusion flickering across his features. I didn't order anything from Lotus Garden. Rachel's stomach dropped. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. She started to turn away, ready to slink back to the elevator and figure out how to explain this disaster to her boss. Wait. Daniel's voice stopped her mid-step. He was staring at her wrist, at her bracelet. The blood drained from his face so quickly that Rachel thought he might collapse. His hand reached out, trembling slightly, as if he wanted to touch the silver heart, but didn't dare. Where did you get that bracelet? His voice was barely above a whisper. Rachel instinctively pulled her wrist closer to her body. It's mine. I've always had it. Always. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving the bracelet. Since when? Since forever, I guess. I don't remember not having it. The conversation was taking a turn she didn't understand, and it was making her uncomfortable. Look, I should go. Sorry about the mix-up with the food. No, wait, please. Daniel's voice was urgent now. Desperate. That bracelet, can you tell me what it says? Rachel looked down at the worn engraving she'd traced with her finger 1,000 times. Forever, Daddy. But I don't know what it means. I was found as a kid. No family, no memories. This was the only thing I had. Daniel's legs seemed to give out, and he gripped the reception desk for support. Jennifer rushed to his side, but he waved her away, his eyes never leaving Rachel's face. What's your name? He asked. Rachel Bennett. How old are you? 27. She was backing toward the elevator now, spooked by the intensity in his gaze. Why? Daniel was studying her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle, taking in every detail. Her dark hair, her green eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow that she'd gotten from a fall she couldn't remember. You were found when you were 4. Rachel nodded, one hand on the elevator call button. In Chicago, the police never figured out where I came from. Something in Daniel's expression cracked, like a dam finally giving way after holding back decades of pressure. He looked at her with such raw emotion that it made her chest tight. Grace. The name fell from his lips like a prayer, like a question. Like a hope he'd carried for 23 years, the elevator doors opened behind her, but Rachel didn't move. Something about the way he said that name sent a shiver down her spine, like an echo of something she'd lost long ago. I'm sorry. I don't know any Grace, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, they felt wrong somehow. Daniel was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Please, just give me 5 minutes, please. The elevator doors started to close, but Rachel caught them, standing frozen between two worlds, the familiar one of struggle and uncertainty behind her, and something unknown, terrifying, and oddly hopeful ahead, against every instinct screaming at her to run. She stepped back into the hallway. 5 minutes, she said, 23 years earlier. The Crawford mansion buzzed with the controlled chaos of a 4-year-old's birthday party. Balloons bobbed against the cathedral ceiling of the main hall, and the sound of children's laughter echoed off marble walls that had witnessed 3 generations of family celebrations. Grace Crawford, her dark curls bouncing with each step, raced between the guests in her princess dress, a crown of plastic jewels sitting slightly askew on her head. "Daddy, look what I can do," she called out, spinning in circles until she stumbled, giggling. Daniel Crawford knelt down to her level, his face lighting up with the kind of pure joy that only a father watching his daughter could feel. At 29, he was already showing signs of the business acumen that would make him a billionaire. But in moments like these, he was just a dad completely smitten with his little girl. "That was amazing, princess," he said, steadying her as she swayed from dizziness. "But I have something even more special for you." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, watching as Grace's eyes went wide with anticipation. Inside, nestled against white silk, was a delicate silver bracelet with a heart-shaped charm. "It's beautiful, Daddy," Grace breathed, her small fingers tracing the engraved words. "Forever, Daddy." This means that no matter where you go, no matter how big you get, you'll always be my little princess, Daniel said, fastening the bracelet around her tiny wrist. And Daddy will always find you, okay? Always, Grace asked, the seriousness of the moment not lost on her 4-year-old mind. Always. Laura Crawford watched from across the room, her heart swelling with love for her family. At 26, she was still the same woman Daniel had fallen in love with in college. Kind, intelligent, and fiercely protective of those she loved. She was also currently wrestling with a secret that was eating her alive. Beautiful party, Mark Crawford said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Daniel's younger brother was handsome in a way that demanded attention, but there was something in his eyes that had always made Laura uncomfortable, a hunger that seemed to devour everything it touched. Thank you, Laura said coolly, not taking the offered drink. Grace seems to be having a wonderful time. She's lucky to have such devoted parents. Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. Speaking of devotion, have you given any more thought to what we discussed? Laura's blood ran cold. 3 weeks ago, she discovered discrepancies in the company books, money being siphoned off into accounts she couldn't trace. When she dug deeper, following a paper trail that led through shell companies and offshore accounts, she'd found Mark's signature on documents that made her stomach turn. There's nothing to think about, she said quietly. What you're doing is theft, Mark, from your own family. What I'm doing is taking what should have been mine in the first place. Mark's voice was low, dangerous. Danny got everything handed to him. The company, the trust fund, the golden boy treatment, all because he was born 18 months earlier. That's not true. Come on, Laura. You've seen how our father treats us. Daniel can do no wrong, and I'm just the spare part. Mark's grip tightened on his champagne glass. I'm taking what I deserve, and if I don't stay quiet. Mark's smile was cold as winter in Chicago. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Across the room, Daniel was showing Grace how to work a new toy when his phone buzzed. The caller ID made him frown. His head of security never called during family time unless it was an emergency. Excuse me for just a second, princess, he said, ruffling Grace's hair before stepping into his study. The conversation was brief, urgent, and when Daniel emerged, his face was ashen. Laura knew that look. Something was wrong with the Beijing deal, the one that would make or break their expansion into Asian markets. I have to go, he said, already reaching for his coat. Emergency at the office. I'll be back in a few hours. On Grace's birthday. Laura couldn't hide her disappointment. I'm sorry, sweetheart. This deal, if it falls through, it could cost us everything. He kissed her forehead, then knelt down to hug Grace. I'll make it up to you, princess. Tomorrow we'll do whatever you want, just you and me. Promise? Grace asked, holding up her pinky. Promise, Daniel said. Linking his pinky with hers, he was barely out the door when Mark made his move. Shame about Daniel having to leave, he said to Laura, but his attention was on his phone, typing rapidly, especially on such an important day. What are you doing? Laura demanded, calling in a favor. Mark's smile was predatory. You see, Laura, I've been thinking about our conversation, about what happens if you don't keep quiet about my business arrangements. Mark, you can't. I already have. He showed her his phone screen, a text message sent to a number she didn't recognize. Pick up the package at 1247 Riverside. Make it look convincing. Laura's blood turned to ice. What have you done? What I had to do. You were going to destroy everything I've worked for, so I had to remove the threat. Mark pocketed his phone, his expression casual, as if they were discussing the weather. Don't worry, it'll be quick. A home invasion gone wrong. Very tragic. Very believable. You're talking about murdering your brother's wife. I'm talking about protecting my future. Mark's voice was steady, businesslike. And don't worry, Grace won't be hurt. The plan is just to scare her a little. Make Daniel think twice about letting his family get too involved in business matters. A little trauma now might save everyone a lot of trouble later. Laura backed away from him, her mind racing. She had to get Grace out of here, had to call Daniel, had to... The front door exploded inward. 3 men in dark clothing and ski masks stormed into the mansion, their movements quick and professional. The party guests screamed, parents grabbing their children and running for the exits. In the chaos, Laura lost sight of Grace. "Grace!" she screamed, pushing through the panicking crowd. "Grace! Where are you?" She found her daughter hiding behind the grand piano, tears streaming down her face, the silver bracelet catching the light as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby, it's okay." Laura scooped Grace up, her mind spinning with escape routes, the back door, the kitchen, anywhere but here. But Mark was blocking her path, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't going according to his plan. The men weren't supposed to come in shooting. They weren't supposed to terrify everyone. They were supposed to be surgical, precise. "This isn't what we agreed," Mark hissed at one of the masked men. "Plans change," the man replied, his voice muffled. "We do this our way now." That's when Laura realized Mark had lost control of his own plan. These men weren't his hired actors. They were real criminals, and they had their own agenda. "Run," she whispered to Grace, setting her down. "Run to the kitchen and hide in the pantry. Don't come out until Daddy comes home." "Mommy, go, now." Grace ran, her little legs carrying her toward the kitchen as fast as they could. Laura watched her disappear around the corner, then turned to face the men who were advancing on her. "Please," she said, raising her hands. "Take whatever you want, just don't hurt anyone." The first shot echoed through the mansion like thunder. Laura Crawford fell to the marble floor she'd walked across as a bride 7 years earlier, her blood spreading across the white stone like spilled wine. Her last thought was of Grace, hiding in the pantry, waiting for a daddy who would never stop looking for her. In the kitchen, 4-year-old Grace Crawford pressed herself deeper into the pantry, clutching her stuffed rabbit and trying not to cry. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught a sliver of light from under the door, and she touched it with one small finger, remembering her daddy's promise. "Always," she whispered to herself, "Daddy will always find me." But when the men came for her, their plans changed by greed and panic. She would disappear into the Chicago night, and 23 years would pass before that promise could be kept. In the present, Daniel Crawford stared at Rachel Bennett's silver bracelet and felt the weight of every single one of those years crushing down on him. Daniel's hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts, searching for a name that could handle what might be the most important investigation of his life. The 5 minutes he'd asked Rachel for had stretched into 20, and she'd agreed to wait in his office while he made a few calls. She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, still clutching the Thai food bags, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Joshua Turner," Daniel said into his phone, his voice carefully controlled. "I need you in my office now." Rachel shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Mr. Crawford, I really should get going. My boss is probably wondering—" "Please." The word came out more desperate than Daniel intended. "Just a little longer. I promise I'll explain everything soon." There was something in his tone that made Rachel nod. Though every instinct told her to run, she'd learned early in life that when rich, powerful people took an interest in you, it rarely ended well for people like her. 20 minutes later, Joshua Turner knocked on Daniel's office door. At 31, Joshua had the kind of easy confidence that came from good genes and better education. But there was an honesty in his dark eyes that had made him Daniel's go-to attorney for sensitive matters. He was also Nicole Crawford's nephew, though Daniel tried not to hold family connections against competent people. "Daniel, what's the emergency?" Joshua asked, then stopped short when he saw Rachel. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had a meeting." "Joshua, I need you to meet someone." Daniel's voice was tight with emotion he was struggling to contain. "This is Rachel Bennett. Rachel, this is Joshua Turner, one of the best attorneys in Chicago." Rachel stood awkwardly, still holding the food bags. "Nice to meet you, I guess. Though I'm not sure why I need to meet an attorney." Joshua glanced between them, reading the tension in the room like a seasoned lawyer. "Daniel, what's going on? I need you to conduct an investigation. Very discreet, very thorough." Daniel walked to his safe, retrieving a file that looked like it had been handled countless times over the years. Everything you can find about Rachel's background, her life, her origins. "Mr. Crawford?" Rachel interrupted. "I don't understand what's happening here. Why do you want to investigate me? I just delivered the wrong food to the wrong person." Daniel looked at her with such intensity that it made her take a step back. "Rachel, how much do you remember about your life before you were found?" "Nothing. I was 4. I had some kind of trauma-induced amnesia. The doctors said it might come back someday, but she shrugged, a gesture that tried to look casual but couldn't hide years of wondering, why does it matter? It matters because... Daniel caught himself, glancing at Joshua. It matters because I think you might be someone very important. Someone I've been looking for. Joshua's expression shifted as understanding began to dawn. He'd heard the story, of course. Everyone in Daniel's inner circle knew about Grace Crawford, the daughter who'd vanished during a home invasion that killed his first wife. It was the tragedy that had shaped every decision Daniel had made for the past 2 decades. "Daniel," Joshua said carefully, "are you sure about this? Look at her wrist." Joshua's gaze fell to Rachel's bracelet, and his face went pale. As Daniel's attorney, he'd seen the police reports, the evidence photos, the descriptions of what Grace had been wearing the night she disappeared. A silver bracelet with a heart charm engraved with, "Forever, Daddy." "Holy shit," Joshua breathed, then caught himself. "Sorry, I meant..." "It's okay," Rachel said, though nothing about this situation felt okay. "Can someone please explain what's going on? What does my bracelet have to do with anything?" Daniel opened the file, pulling out a photograph that had been handled so many times. The edges were soft. It showed a laughing little girl with dark curls and green eyes, wearing a princess dress and a silver bracelet that was identical to the one on Rachel's wrist. "This is my daughter, Grace," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She disappeared 23 years ago. She was wearing this bracelet when she was taken." Rachel stared at the photograph, a strange feeling creeping up her spine. The little girl in the picture looked like she could have been Rachel's younger sister, or herself as a child. That's quite a coincidence," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I don't believe in coincidences," Daniel said. "Not like this." Joshua was already pulling out his phone, making notes. "Rachel, I'll need to ask you some questions about your childhood, the orphanage, any medical records you might have." "Medical records. DNA tests," Joshua explained gently. "If Daniel's right, if there's even a chance that you're Grace, we need to know for certain." Rachel's hand went instinctively to her bracelet, the gesture so automatic it was like breathing. "And if I'm not, if this is all just some crazy mistake, then you'll have given a grieving father a few hours of hope," Joshua said. "And I'll make sure you're compensated for your time." "I don't want compensation," Rachel said quickly. "I just want to understand what's happening." Something in her voice, the way she said it, made Daniel's chest tight. It reminded him of Grace at 4 years old, always asking why about everything, always needing to understand the world around her. "Okay," Rachel said finally. "Okay, we can do the test, but I need to call my boss first. Let him know I'm going to be late getting back." While Rachel stepped into the hallway to make her call, Joshua moved closer to Daniel. "Are you prepared for this to be real?" he asked quietly. "Because if she is Grace, if she really is your daughter, everything changes, Nicole. The will, the company. I don't care about any of that," Daniel said firmly. "If there's even a chance that she's my little girl, nothing else matters." Joshua nodded, but his expression was troubled. As Nicole's nephew, he knew his aunt well enough to understand that she wouldn't see it the same way. Nicole Crawford had married into wealth and power, and she wouldn't give up her position without a fight. "I'll handle the investigation personally," Joshua said. "Complete discretion. But Daniel, you need to be careful who else knows about this. If word gets out before we have proof..." "I understand." Daniel was watching Rachel through the glass wall of his office. She was pacing as she talked on her phone, one hand gesturing expressively. There was something about her movements that seemed familiar, like an echo of someone he'd lost long ago. When Rachel returned, Joshua had his legal pad ready. "Okay, let's start with basics. Full name, date of birth, any documentation from when you were found." "Rachel Ann Bennett. That's the name they gave me at the orphanage. No middle name originally. They estimated my birth date as March 15th, 1998. Based on dental records and development," Joshua made notes, then looked up. "Grace Crawford was born March 15th, 1998. The silence in the room was deafening. "The orphanage was St. Mary's on the south side," Rachel continued, her voice smaller now. "I was found wandering downtown. No identification, no memory of how I got there. The police never found any missing person reports that matched, because they were looking for Grace Crawford. Daniel said quietly. And you became Rachel Bennett. Rachel's hand went to her bracelet again, and this time she noticed Daniel tracking the movement. I do that when I'm nervous, she explained. I've done it since I can remember. Grace did the same thing, Daniel whispered. Joshua cleared his throat. We'll need to arrange for DNA testing. I can have a lab tech here within the hour. Completely confidential. What if? Rachel started, then stopped. What if what? Daniel prompted gently. What if you're right? What if I am her? Grace. What does that mean for me? For my life? Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and she could see years of grief and hope warring in his expression. It means you're not alone anymore, he said simply. It means you have a family. It means all those questions you've carried about where you came from. They finally have answers. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. Though she couldn't say exactly why, maybe it was the way he looked at her, like she was precious, like she mattered. Or maybe it was the thought that the emptiness she'd carried her whole life might finally have a shape, a reason, a resolution. Okay, she said. Let's find out who I really am. In her penthouse across town, Nicole Crawford noticed that her husband was unusually late coming home. When she called his office, Jennifer informed her that he was in an extended meeting and couldn't be disturbed. Nicole frowned, pouring herself a glass of wine. In 15 years of marriage, Daniel had never had a meeting that couldn't be interrupted for her calls. Something was happening, and Nicole Crawford hadn't gotten where she was by ignoring her instincts. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. Mark, she said when he answered. We need to talk. The DNA lab technician left Daniel's office at 6:47 p.m. with 2 samples, one from Rachel's cheek swab, and one from Daniel's. The waiting would normally take 48 hours, but money had a way of accelerating science. Daniel had paid enough to have the results by morning. Rachel sat in the same leather chair, but now everything felt different. The office that had seemed intimidating hours ago now felt like a place where her entire life might change. Joshua had gone home with promises to start his investigation first thing in the morning, leaving her alone with a man who might be her father. You don't have to stay, Daniel said, though his tone suggested he desperately wanted her to. I know this is overwhelming. It is, Rachel admitted, but I've been wondering about this my whole life. Where I came from, who I was before. I guess I'm not ready to leave without answers. Daniel walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. The city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds, and Rachel found herself wondering if Grace Crawford had ever stood in this same spot, looking out at the same view. Can you tell me about her? Rachel asked quietly. About Grace. Daniel's reflection in the window smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. She was remarkable, curious about everything, always asking questions. She had this laugh that could fill a room, and she never met a stranger. Laura used to joke that Grace would befriend a tornado if it stood still long enough. Laura was your wife, my first wife, Grace's mother. Daniel's voice grew heavy. She died the same night Grace disappeared. Home invasion. She was trying to protect our daughter. Rachel felt a strange pang in her chest. Something that might have been grief for a woman she couldn't remember. I'm sorry. Grace had this stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere. Flopsy, she called it. Couldn't sleep without it. Couldn't go anywhere without it. The police never found it. Daniel turned from the window. Do you remember having any stuffed animals as a child? Rachel shook her head, but something flickered at the edge of her memory. Soft fur, the smell of lavender, a sense of safety. No, I don't think so. But sometimes I have these dreams about being held, feeling safe. There's always this scent, like flowers. Laura wore lavender perfume, Daniel said softly. The silence stretched between them. Filled with possibility and fear, Rachel's phone buzzed, a text from her roommate asking where she was, but she ignored it. Nothing in her small, carefully constructed life seemed as important as this moment. What was she like? Rachel asked. As a person, I mean, her personality. Daniel's face lit up. Fearless. Absolutely fearless. She'd climb anything, talk to anyone, try everything at least once. When she was 3, she decided she wanted to paint the living room wall to make it prettier. Laura found her with a bucket of blue paint and a kitchen brush, already halfway up the wall, despite everything. Rachel found herself smiling. Did you let her finish? Of course we did. That wall stayed blue for 2 years. Grace was so proud of it. Daniel sat down across from her. She also had this thing about helping people. Stray cats, crying kids at the playground, anyone who looked sad. She had this enormous heart. Rachel touched her bracelet unconsciously. The engraving, "Forever, Daddy." Was that something she said? It was her response to everything. I love you forever, Daddy. Will you love me forever, Daddy? It became our thing. Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I told her that no matter where she went, no matter how big she got, she'd always be my little princess. And I'd always find her. Always, Rachel whispered. And the word felt familiar on her tongue, like something she'd said 1,000 times before. Daniel stared at her. What did you say? Always. I don't know why I said that. Rachel frowned, pressing her fingers to her temples. Sometimes words just come out, like they're from somewhere else. Rachel, Daniel said carefully, what's the earliest memory you have? Not facts you were told, but something you actually remember feeling or seeing. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to reach back through years of carefully constructed walls she'd built around her past. There's singing, a man's voice, deep and warm. He's singing something about... She struggled, grasping for fragments. Something about stars, and there's light coming from somewhere, like a hallway. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I sang that to Grace every night. I'd sit in the hallway so the light wouldn't keep her awake, but she could still see me. Rachel's eyes snapped open. The memory was clearer now, stronger. A tall figure silhouetted in a doorway, the sound of his voice wrapping around her like a blanket. You have a scar, she said suddenly, on your left hand. Between your thumb and index finger, Daniel held up his hand, showing the thin white line. Kitchen accident when Grace was 2. How did you... I don't know. Rachel's heart was racing. I can see it in my mind, but I don't know why. Daniel's phone buzzed on his desk. A text message. He glanced at it and his face went white. The results, he said, his voice barely audible. They're ready. Rachel felt like she might throw up. That was fast. I may have expedited the process. Daniel's hands were shaking as he forwarded the message to his computer. Are you ready for this? No, Rachel said honestly. But let's do it anyway. Daniel opened the email attachment, his eyes scanning the scientific jargon and probability percentages. Rachel watched his face, trying to read his expression as he absorbed the information. Then he looked up at her, and she saw 23 years of grief and hope colliding in his eyes. 99.97% probability, he said, his voice wonder and disbelief. You're my daughter. You're Grace. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She gripped the arms of her chair, feeling like the world was tilting sideways. I'm... what? You're Grace Crawford. You're my little girl. Daniel stood up, then sat back down, then stood again, like he couldn't figure out what to do with his body. My God, Grace, you're alive. You're here. I'm Rachel, she said automatically, then stopped. Was she? Had she been living someone else's life for 23 years? You're both, Daniel said gently. You're Rachel Bennett, the strong, independent woman who survived and built a life from nothing. And you're Grace Crawford, the daughter I never stopped looking for. Rachel, Grace, felt tears streaming down her face without realizing she'd started crying. I don't remember you. I don't remember anything. What if I never do? Then we'll make new memories, Daniel said, moving to kneel beside her chair. But Grace, Rachel, whatever name feels right to you, you're not alone anymore. You have family. You have a father who loves you. Forever. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Forever, Daniel confirmed. And something deep in Rachel's chest that had been broken for 23 years began to heal. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, the link that had brought them together, the promise that had finally been kept. Daddy, she said tentatively, the word feeling foreign and familiar at the same time. Daniel's composure finally cracked completely. Yes, Princess, it's me. I found you. I finally found you. Outside the office windows, Chicago glittered in the darkness, a city full of millions of people. But in that moment, there were only 2, A father and daughter who had found their way back to each other across 23 years of separation and pain. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the building across the street, or the phone call being made to report what had been observed. The reunion they'd waited over 2 decades for had begun, but so had the danger that would threaten to tear them apart again. Nicole Crawford's manicured nails drummed against the marble countertop of her penthouse kitchen as she waited for Mark to arrive. The wine she'd poured an hour ago sat untouched, her appetite for alcohol dulled by the gnawing certainty that something was very wrong. Daniel's extended meeting had stretched past 9 p.m., and he still wasn't answering her calls. The elevator chimed, and Mark Crawford stepped into the penthouse like he owned it. At 48, he'd maintained the good looks that had always made things easy for him, but there was a restlessness in his movements that spoke of a man who'd never quite gotten what he thought he deserved. "You sounded panicked on the phone," Mark said, helping himself to Daniel's expensive whiskey. "What's got you so worked up?" "Daniel's been in his office all day with some woman. Jennifer said it was a food delivery that went wrong, but that was this morning. No meeting lasts that long." Mark's hand paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of woman?" "Young, according to Jennifer. Dark hair. Looked like street trash, but Daniel's been treating her like she's the Queen of England." Nicole's voice was tight with suspicion. "He's never shut me out of anything before. Probably just some charity case," Mark said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You know how Daniel gets about helping the less fortunate?" Nicole studied her brother-in-law's face. After 15 years of marriage to Daniel, she'd learned to read the Crawford men like books. Mark was hiding something. "There's more," she said. "I called security to check the visitor logs. The woman's name was Rachel Bennett, and Joshua Turner spent 2 hours in Daniel's office with them." Mark's whiskey glass slipped from his fingers. Shattering against the marble floor, amber liquid spread across the white stone like blood. "Shit," he muttered, kneeling to clean up the glass. "Mark." Nicole's voice was dangerously quiet. "What aren't you telling me?" Mark looked up at her from the floor, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. "We need to sit down," he said. 20 minutes later, Nicole Crawford understood why her husband had spent all day locked in his office with a stranger. Mark had told her everything. The bracelet, the resemblance, the DNA test that had undoubtedly been conducted. "Grace Crawford is dead," Nicole said flatly. "She died 23 years ago. Her body was never found," Mark reminded her, "because there was nothing left to find." Nicole's composure was cracking. "You told me the men you hired took care of everything. I told you what I needed to tell you." Mark poured himself another whiskey with hands that weren't quite steady. "The truth is they botched the job. They were supposed to grab Grace, stage Laura's death to look like she died protecting her daughter, then dispose of the kid quietly. Instead, they panicked after shooting Laura and ran with Grace. I never heard from them again." Nicole stared at him. "You're telling me that for 23 years. There's been a chance that Daniel's daughter was alive, and you never thought to mention it. I assumed they'd killed her and dumped the body somewhere it would never be found. It was the smart play." Mark's voice was defensive. "How was I supposed to know some bleeding heart would find her and stick her in an orphanage? This can't be happening." Nicole stood up, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Do you understand what this means? If that girl really is Grace, everything changes. The will, the inheritance, the company. Daniel doesn't care about the money," Mark said. "He'd give it all away to have his daughter back." "Well, I care about the money." Nicole's voice rose to near hysteria. "I've been Mrs. Daniel Crawford for 15 years. I've earned my place in this family, and I'm not going to let some street rat take it away from me." Mark watched his sister-in-law with calculating eyes. Nicole's ambition had always been her most attractive quality, and her ruthlessness was what had made their arrangement work so well. She provided him with inside information about Daniel's business deals, and he made sure she maintained her position as the grieving billionaire's devoted wife. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked quietly. "I want you to fix this," Nicole said. "The same way you fixed it 23 years ago." "Nicole, we're not talking about some random threat to the company. This is Daniel's daughter. If anything happens to her now, after he's found her, then we make sure nothing can be traced back to us." Nicole's voice was cold, calculating. "That girl has been living on the streets, hasn't she? People like that have dangerous lives. Accidents happen. Mark nodded slowly. It would have to be subtle, natural, an overdose maybe, or a mugging gone wrong. I don't care how you do it. Just make her disappear. Again. Nicole's ice blue eyes were hard as diamonds. And this time, make sure it's permanent. Across town, Rachel sat in the passenger seat of Daniel's Mercedes. Watching the city lights blur past the windows, he'd insisted on driving her home, claiming he wanted to see where she lived, but she suspected he was afraid that if he let her out of his sight, she might disappear again. "You don't have to walk me up," she said, as he pulled into the parking lot of her rundown apartment building. "This isn't exactly your neighborhood. Grace. Rachel." Daniel corrected himself quickly. "What do you want me to call you?" She considered the question. "I've been Rachel for 23 years. Grace feels like someone else. Someone I don't remember being. Maybe we can work up to Grace." "Rachel it is," Daniel said gently. "And I'm walking you up because that's what fathers do. They make sure their daughters get home safely." Rachel's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better days sometime around the Carter administration. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and desperation, and Daniel tried not to let his horror show on his face. "It's not much," Rachel said, unlocking the door, "but it's mine." The studio apartment was tiny but clean, with a mattress on the floor, a small table that served as both desk and dining room, and a hot plate that constituted the kitchen. Daniel looked around at this space where his daughter had been living, and felt his heart break a little more. "Rachel," he said carefully, "you know you don't have to live like this anymore, right? You're my daughter. You're an heiress. You could have anything you want. This is all I've ever known," Rachel said, sitting on the edge of her mattress. "I worked for every square foot of this place. It represents everything I've accomplished on my own." Daniel sat beside her, understanding more than she realized. "You don't trust it yet. The idea that someone might take care of you. I've been taking care of myself since I was 18, Rachel said. "I've never had anyone I could depend on." "You have someone now," Daniel said firmly. "You have me, and I know it's going to take time to believe that, but I'm not going anywhere. I spent 23 years looking for you, and now that I've found you, I'm never letting you go again." Rachel looked down at her bracelet, turning the heart charm between her fingers. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "The night I disappeared. Do you blame yourself?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Every day," he said finally. "I left for a business meeting. If I'd stayed home, if I'd been there, you would have died too," Rachel said quietly. "And then I wouldn't have a father to find me." Daniel looked at her with something like wonder. "When did you become so wise?" 23 years of hard knocks," Rachel said with a small smile. "It's a hell of an education." Outside her window, 3 floors below, a man in a dark jacket made a phone call to report the address where Daniel Crawford's newfound daughter lived. The first pieces of Nicole and Mark's plan were already falling into place. But in the small apartment, father and daughter talked until nearly midnight. 23 years of separation beginning to bridge with each shared story, each tentative smile, each moment of recognition that felt like coming home. When Daniel finally left, promising to pick her up for breakfast the next morning, Rachel locked the door behind him and leaned against it, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in a single day. She had a father. She had a family. She had answers to questions she'd carried her entire life. What she didn't have was any idea that those same answers had just painted a target on her back. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the DNA results confirmed what Daniel's heart had already known. Rachel was walking to her morning shift at the delivery service when she noticed the black sedan following her, the same one she'd seen parked outside her building for 2 nights running. "Paranoid much," she muttered to herself. But 23 years of survival instincts weren't easily dismissed. She ducked into a coffee shop and watched through the window as the sedan drove past slowly, the driver's face hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the overcast morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Breakfast tomorrow. There's so much more I want to know about you." Rachel smiled despite her unease. The past 3 days had been surreal, getting to know the father she'd never remembered having, hearing stories about her mother that made Laura Crawford feel real for the first time. Daniel was patient with her questions, understanding about her need to take things slow, and she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have the family she'd always dreamed of. The coffee shop door chimed, and Joshua Turner walked in, his usually perfect hair slightly mussed, and his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "Rachel, thank God I found you." He looked around the coffee shop nervously. "We need to talk." "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, noting the tension in his voice. "Not here." Joshua's eyes swept the street outside. "Somewhere private." 20 minutes later, they sat in Joshua's car in an empty parking garage, the concrete walls providing an echo chamber for his disturbing news. "I've been investigating your background like Daniel asked," Joshua began. "But I've also been looking into some other things. Financial records, business dealings, family connections. And there are inconsistencies in the reports from the night you disappeared. Police statements that don't match witness accounts. Evidence that was never properly processed." Joshua's hands gripped the steering wheel. "Rachel, I don't think what happened to your family was random." Rachel felt ice form in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone wanted your mother dead and you gone. And I think that someone might be..." Joshua stopped, his face pale. "Might be what?" "My aunt," he whispered. "Nicole, and possibly Mark Crawford." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Nicole wasn't even married to Daniel then." "No, but she knew Mark. I found financial records. They've been in contact for over 20 years. Money transfers, shared investments, communications that go back to before your mother died." Joshua turned to face her. "Rachel, I think they've been planning this for decades." Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway. "Rachel Bennett." The voice was electronically distorted, obviously disguised. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what you're trying to do. Playing dress-up as a rich man's daughter won't work. We know who you really are. A con artist, a scammer, a nobody trying to steal what isn't yours. You're wrong. The DNA tests were faked. The whole thing is a setup to get money from Daniel Crawford. But we have proof of who you really are, and it's going to come out, unless you disappear, tonight." The line went dead. Joshua was watching her face. What was that about? "Someone knows about the DNA tests. They're saying they're fake, that I'm a con artist." Rachel's hands were shaking. "How could they know about the tests?" Daniel said they were confidential. "Because someone on the inside is feeding them information." Joshua's expression was grim. "Rachel, you're in danger, real danger. From your own family. From people who have billions of dollars to lose if you're recognized as Daniel's daughter." Joshua started the car. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "I'm not running," Rachel said firmly. "I've been running my whole life. From foster homes, from bad situations, from anything that might hurt me. I finally found out who I am, and I'm not giving that up because someone wants to scare me. This isn't about being brave. It's about staying alive." "No," Rachel's voice was steel. "This is about finally having a family and not letting anyone take that away from me." That evening, Rachel returned to her apartment to find the door slightly ajar. Every survival instinct she'd developed over the years screamed danger, but she pushed the door open anyway. The place had been systematically destroyed. Her mattress was slashed open, stuffing scattered across the floor. Her few possessions were broken or missing. Graffitied across the wall in red paint were the words, "Gold digger bitch. Leave now or die." Rachel stood in the wreckage of her life, feeling something inside her harden into resolve. Whoever was doing this had made a mistake. They'd assumed she was still the scared little girl who'd been found on the streets 23 years ago. But she wasn't that child anymore. She was a survivor, and survivors didn't back down. Her phone rang. Daniel's number. "Hey," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Rachel, thank God I've been trying to reach you. Something's happened. Someone's been spreading rumors about you at the company, saying you're a fraud, that the DNA tests were fake. I know. My apartment's been trashed too." "What?" Daniel's voice rose. "Are you hurt? Where are you?" "I'm fine. But Daniel, Joshua thinks..." "Don't say anything else over the phone," Daniel interrupted. "Come to my house now. I'm sending a car." 30 minutes later, Rachel stood in the foyer of the Crawford mansion, the same house where she'd lived as a child, though she couldn't remember it. Daniel looked haggard, like he'd aged years in the span of days. "This is my fault," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I should have known this would happen." I should have protected you better. Protected me from what? From people who see you as a threat to their inheritance. Daniel's voice was bitter. I've been naive, thinking that finding you would just be a miracle without consequences. Daniel, Nicole's voice came from the top of the staircase. What's all this commotion? Rachel looked up to see her father's wife descending the stairs like a queen holding court. Nicole Crawford was everything Rachel wasn't. Polished, elegant, perfectly composed. She looked like she belonged in this world of marble and crystal, while Rachel felt like an intruder in her torn jeans and delivery service jacket. Nicole, I'd like you to meet someone very important, Daniel said, his arm still around Rachel's shoulders. This is Rachel Bennett. She's Grace. Nicole's face went through a series of micro-expressions so quickly that Rachel almost missed them. Shock, calculation, and something that might have been hatred. Grace. Nicole's voice was carefully controlled. But that's impossible. Grace died 23 years ago. The DNA tests confirm it, Daniel said firmly. Rachel is our daughter. Our daughter. Nicole's smile was razor sharp. Daniel, darling, I think you mean your daughter. I wasn't part of your life when Grace was born. The correction was subtle but pointed, and Rachel felt it like a slap. Nicole was making it clear that whatever familial bond existed, it didn't include her. Of course, Daniel said quickly. I just meant, I know what you meant. Nicole's gaze fell on Rachel like a judge examining evidence. And Rachel, dear, you must be overwhelmed by all this. Finding out you're heiress to a fortune must be quite exciting. There was poison in the word, exciting, an implication that made Rachel's cheeks burn. I'm not interested in money, Rachel said quietly. I just wanted to know where I came from. How refreshingly honest, Nicole said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but refreshing. Well, I suppose we'll all have to adjust to this new reality, won't we? As Nicole glided back upstairs, Rachel caught sight of a man watching from the shadows of the hallway. Mark Crawford, Daniel's brother. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, but it made her skin crawl. Don't mind them, Daniel said quietly. They'll come around. It's just a shock for everyone. But Rachel knew better. She'd seen enough predators in her life to recognize them when she saw them. Nicole and Mark weren't shocked. They were threatened, and threatened animals were the most dangerous kind. As Daniel showed her to a guest room for the night, Rachel touched her bracelet and made a silent promise to the 4-year-old girl she used to be. She wouldn't disappear again. Not for anyone. The war had been declared, but Rachel Bennett, Grace Crawford, intended to win it. Joshua Turner hadn't slept in 3 days. His office at Turner & Associates looked like a hurricane had blown through it. Files scattered across every surface. Coffee cups growing science experiments. And legal documents creating paper mountains on his desk. The deeper he dug into his family's connection to the Crawford tragedy, the sicker he felt. The smoking gun sat in front of him now. A bank statement from 1998 showing a wire transfer of $50,000 from Mark Crawford to an account belonging to Vincent Vinnie Kowalski, a man whose rap sheet read like a catalog of Chicago's worst crimes. The transfer was dated 3 days before Grace Crawford's disappearance. Joshua's hands shook as he photographed the document with his phone. His own uncle had paid to have a 4-year-old child kidnapped and her mother murdered. Working late again, Joshua spun around to find Mark Crawford standing in his office doorway, looking perfectly composed in an expensive suit despite the late hour. Uncle Mark, Joshua said, quickly moving to cover the papers on his desk. What are you doing here? Checking in on my favorite nephew. Mark stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded ominous in the quiet building. You've been putting in a lot of hours lately. Nicole mentioned you're working on something sensitive for Daniel. Just routine corporate stuff, Joshua lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. Mark's smile was predatory. Come on, Josh. We're family. You can tell me what's really going on. Nothing that would interest you. Oh, but it does interest me, especially when it involves a certain young woman who's been claiming to be Grace Crawford. Mark moved closer, his eyes scanning the chaos of papers. You know, that's quite a coincidence. Rachel Bennett showing up just when Daniel's feeling lonely and nostalgic. Joshua forced himself to meet his uncle's gaze. The DNA test confirmed it. She really is Grace. DNA tests can be faked, Mark said casually. Money can buy all sorts of convenient evidence. Are you suggesting Rachel somehow orchestrated this? I'm suggesting that grieving fathers make easy targets for con artists. Mark picked up a pen from Joshua's desk, twirling it between his fingers. It would be a shame if Daniel got hurt by someone taking advantage of his pain. The conversation felt like a chess game, where Joshua was perpetually 3 moves behind. What do you want, Mark? I want you to be careful, nephew. Poking around in old family business can be dangerous, especially when you don't understand all the factors involved. Then help me understand, Joshua said, deciding to take a calculated risk. Tell me about Vincent Kowalski. Mark went very still. The pen stopped twirling. I don't know anyone by that name, he said, but his voice had changed, become flatter, more careful. $50,000, March 12, 1998, Joshua pressed. 3 days before Grace disappeared. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? Mark set the pen down with deliberate precision. When he looked up, all pretense of familial warmth had vanished from his expression. You're playing a very dangerous game, Joshua. I'm trying to find the truth. The truth? Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is that some secrets are buried for good reasons. The truth is that idealistic young lawyers who don't know when to stop digging sometimes have unfortunate accidents. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you advice. As your uncle, as someone who cares about your future. Mark moved toward the door. Drop this investigation, Josh, for your own good. And if I don't? Mark paused with his hand on the doorknob. Then you might find out what happened to the last person who threatened to expose family business. After Mark left, Joshua sat in his office for a long time, staring at the bank records that proved his uncle was a killer. The smart thing would be to follow Mark's advice. Destroy the evidence. Stop digging. Pretend he'd never found anything. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rachel's face, the way she'd looked when she talked about finally having a family. The hope in her voice when she called Daniel Daddy for the first time. She deserved the truth, even if it destroyed everything. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Stop looking or join your parents. Joshua stared at the message, his blood turning to ice. His parents had died in a car accident when he was 12, a crash that had never quite made sense to investigators. A clear day, good weather, no mechanical problems found with the vehicle, the kind of accident that wasn't really an accident at all. He was reaching for his phone to call Rachel when it rang in his hands. Her number. Joshua. Her voice was shaky, frightened. Something's wrong. I think someone's trying to... The line went dead. Joshua grabbed his keys and ran. 20 minutes later, he found Rachel in the emergency room at Chicago General, her left arm in a sling and a bandage covering a cut on her forehead. What happened? He demanded, rushing to her side. A car tried to run me down, Rachel said, her voice hollow with shock. I was walking to the coffee shop near Daniel's house, and this black sedan came out of nowhere. If I hadn't jumped behind a parked car, it would have killed me. Did you see the driver? No, the windows were tinted. But Joshua... She grabbed his arm with her good hand. This wasn't random. The car was waiting for me. Whoever was driving knew exactly where I'd be. Joshua felt the weight of the evidence in his briefcase like a lead anchor. Rachel, there's something I need to tell you about what really happened the night you disappeared. What do you mean? Joshua looked around the busy emergency room, filled with people and potential eavesdroppers. Not here. When you're released, we'll go somewhere safe, and I'll explain everything. Joshua, you're scaring me. Good, he said grimly. You should be scared. We both should be. 2 hours later, they sat in Joshua's car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 40 minutes outside the city. Rachel cradled a cup of coffee with both hands, her face pale in the fluorescent lighting. I found bank records, Joshua began, his voice barely above a whisper. Payments from Mark Crawford to a known criminal 3 days before you disappeared. Rachel set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. You're saying Mark hired someone to kidnap me? I'm saying Mark hired someone to kill your mother and make you disappear. The plan was probably to kill you too. But something went wrong. Joshua pulled out copies of the documents. The men he hired panicked after shooting your mother, instead of finishing the job. They ran with you. They probably sold you to human traffickers, who eventually abandoned you when you became too much trouble. Rachel stared at the papers. her face cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally, a cold fury that made Joshua take a step back. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would he do that?" "Money. Power. Your father had just inherited controlling interest in the family company. If something happened to you and your mother, Mark would be next in line." Joshua hesitated. "Rachel, there's more. I think Nicole knew. I think she's been part of this from the beginning. That's why she married Daniel," Rachel said, pieces clicking into place. "She wasn't looking for love. She was securing her position. And now you're back, threatening everything they've built." Joshua leaned forward. "Rachel, they tried to kill you tonight. This isn't going to stop. Then we stop them first." Rachel's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "What do we need to prove it? More evidence, witness testimony, something that ties them directly to the crime." Joshua studied her face. "But Rachel, if we do this, there's no going back. We're talking about destroying your father's brother and his wife. It'll tear the family apart." "They tore my family apart first," Rachel said simply. "They murdered my mother and stole 23 years of my life. Whatever happens to them, they earned it." Joshua nodded, feeling something shift between them. They weren't just attorney and client anymore, or even friends. They were conspirators, bound together by truth and danger. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Mark threatened me tonight, and I think he might have been responsible for my parents' death too." Rachel reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we get justice for all of them." Outside the diner windows, the Chicago skyline glittered in the distance like a constellation of promises and threats. Somewhere in that sprawl of lights, Mark and Nicole Crawford were planning their next move, but now they were no longer hunting a lonely, confused young woman with no allies. They were facing Grace Crawford, a survivor who'd learned to fight in the hardest school of all, and Joshua Turner, a man with nothing left to lose. The real war was about to begin. The safe house Joshua had arranged was a modest apartment in Wicker Park, far from the Crawford mansion and Nicole's watchful eyes. Rachel sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by photo albums Daniel had brought her. 23 years of birthdays he'd celebrated alone. Christmases where he'd bought presents for a daughter who wasn't there to receive them. "He never stopped hoping," she whispered, turning a page to reveal a picture of a birthday cake with 5 candles. Grace would have been 5 that year, but the cake sat untouched on an empty table. Daniel watched her from the couch, his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. "I couldn't bring myself to stop. Your mother always said birthdays were sacred, that every year deserved to be celebrated." Rachel traced her finger along the edge of a photograph, Daniel standing beside Grace's empty bedroom, which he'd preserved exactly as she'd left it. Pink walls, stuffed animals, a tiny desk where a 4-year-old had practiced writing her name. "Can we go there?" she asked suddenly. "To the house, to my room." "Of course," Daniel said, "but are you sure it might be overwhelming? I need to see it. I need to try to remember." An hour later, they stood outside the Crawford mansion. Rachel had been here just days ago, but knowing it had once been her home made everything look different. The windows seemed familiar now, the front steps like something from a half-remembered dream. Daniel led her upstairs to a door that had remained locked for over 2 decades. When he opened it, Rachel gasped. The room was a shrine to childhood, exactly as a 4-year-old had left it. A twin bed with a pink comforter, shelves lined with books and toys, and in the corner, a rocking chair where someone had once read bedtime stories. "I used to sit there," Daniel said softly, pointing to the chair, "every night reading to you until you fell asleep." Rachel stepped into the room, and something shifted in her mind. The air seemed to shimmer, and suddenly she could hear it. A deep voice reading from a picture book, the creaking of the rocking chair, the sound of her own giggling. And the little bunny said goodnight to the stars. Goodnight to the air, goodnight to the noises everywhere. The words came out of her mouth without conscious thought. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Good night, Moon. It was your favorite. I can hear you," Rachel whispered, pressing her hands to her temples. "Reading to me. Your voice is different now. Older, but I can hear it." More memories began surfacing like bubbles rising to the surface of still water. Playing dress-up in her mother's shoes, building blocks in the living room, the smell of pancakes on Sunday mornings. "Mama made funny shapes," Rachel said, the words coming from somewhere deep in her subconscious. Pancakes that look like animals. I always wanted the elephant one because it had the biggest ears. She made them every Sunday, Daniel confirmed. You'd stand on a chair next to her at the stove, trying to flip them yourself. Rachel moved to the toy chest, her hands seeming to know where they were going. She lifted the lid and pulled out a worn stuffed rabbit with one ear slightly chewed. Flopsy, she breathed, the moment she touched the rabbit. It was like a dam bursting. 23 years of suppressed memories flooded back in a torrent that made her legs give out. Daniel caught her as she fell, holding her as images cascaded through her mind, running through the house in a princess dress, Mama brushing her hair before bed, Daddy lifting her up to pick apples from a tree in the backyard, the feeling of being absolutely, completely loved, and then the screaming, men in masks breaking down the door. Mama pushing her toward the kitchen, her voice urgent and afraid. Run to the pantry, baby. Hide until Daddy comes home. The sound of a gunshot. Mama falling, blood spreading across the white marble floor. Rough hands grabbing her, pulling her away from her hiding place. A van that smelled like cigarettes and fear. Strange places, strange faces. Until finally she was alone on the street with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Rachel sobbed against Daniel's chest. 23 years of grief and confusion finally finding their voice. He held her tightly, rocking her the same way he had when she was 4 and had nightmares. I remember, she gasped between tears. I remember Mama dying. I remember the men taking me. I remember all of it. I'm so sorry, Daniel whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry I wasn't there to protect you. You couldn't have known, Rachel said, pulling back to look at him through her tears. But Daddy, I remember something else. One of the men, when they thought I was unconscious in the van, he made a phone call. He said, Mark, we got the kid, but the woman fought back. This is messier than you promised. Daniel went very still. Mark, your brother ordered the hit, Rachel said, her voice gaining strength as the memories solidified. He's the one who had Mama killed. He's the one who had me taken. The bedroom door opened, and Nicole stepped inside, her face a mask of concern that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel, darling, what's wrong? I heard crying. Her gaze fell on Rachel, still clutching the stuffed rabbit. Oh, how touching. Playing with old toys. Get out, Rachel said quietly. Excuse me? I said get out. Rachel stood up, still holding Flopsy. This is my room, in my house, and I want you out of it. Nicole's mask slipped slightly. Your house. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Dear, this is still Daniel's home, and I'm still his wife. For now, Rachel said, and something in her tone made Nicole take a step back. Rachel, Daniel said gently, maybe we should... No. Rachel's voice was clear and strong. No more playing nice, no more pretending everything's fine. I remember what happened. Daddy, I remember who killed Mama, and I remember who ordered it. Nicole's face went white. I don't know what you think you remember, but childhood trauma can create false memories. Can it create bank records? Joshua's voice came from the doorway. He stepped into the room carrying a briefcase full of evidence. Because I have plenty of those. Joshua, Nicole said, her voice sharp with warning. You're interfering in family business. Family business, Rachel laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the business of murdering my mother and selling me to human traffickers? That's enough, Nicole snapped. Daniel, you need to control your alleged daughter before she says something she'll regret. The only thing I regret, Rachel said, moving closer to Nicole, is not figuring this out sooner, but don't worry. I plan to make up for lost time. Nicole looked between Rachel, Daniel, and Joshua, calculating her options. You can't prove anything. It's the word of a confused girl against a respected member of this family. Actually, Joshua said, opening his briefcase, we can prove quite a lot. Bank transfers, phone records, witness statements from some very interesting people who are eager to make deals with the FBI. FBI. Nicole's composure finally cracked completely. Oh yes, Rachel said, her smile sharp as broken glass. We've been busy. Did you really think you could try to kill me twice and I wouldn't fight back? Nicole backed toward the door, but Mark appeared in the hallway behind her, blocking her escape route. He looked between the assembled group. taking in the evidence spread across the toy chest, the guilt written on Nicole's face, and the cold fury in Rachel's eyes. "Well," he said with false casualness, "this is awkward. Not as awkward as it's going to be," Rachel said, "because Uncle Mark, I remember everything now, including the phone call you made from the van after your hired killers screwed up your perfect plan." Mark's face went ashen. "Rachel, you have to understand. I understand perfectly," she said. "I understand that you murdered my mother and destroyed my family for money. I understand that you've been lying to my father for 23 years, and I understand that you're going to pay for every second of pain you've caused." In that moment, standing in her childhood bedroom with her father beside her, and the truth finally in the light, Rachel Bennett fully became Grace Crawford again. Not the frightened 4-year-old who'd been taken, but a woman who'd survived everything they'd thrown at her and come back stronger. The little girl who'd once played with toys in this room was gone. In her place stood someone much more dangerous, someone who'd learned to fight in the streets and had nothing left to lose. The standoff in Grace's childhood bedroom lasted only seconds before Mark made his decision. His hand moved to something hidden beneath his jacket, a gun that gleamed dully in the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Nobody moves," he said, his voice steady despite the desperation in his eyes. "And nobody makes any phone calls." Daniel stepped protectively in front of Rachel. "Mark, what are you doing?" "What I should have done 23 years ago," Mark replied, his gaze fixed on Rachel. "Finish the job properly. You're going to shoot us in the middle of the house?" Joshua asked, his lawyer's mind still working even in crisis. In broad daylight, Nicole, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly came alive. "Mark, you idiot! There are other ways to handle this." "No, there aren't," Mark snapped. "They have evidence, they remember. It's over unless we end it right here, right now." Rachel felt her father's hand reach back and squeeze hers. The same protective gesture he'd probably made 23 years ago when he was too late to save her mother. "Mark," Daniel said, his voice carefully controlled. "You're my brother. We can work this out. Whatever you've done. Whatever mistakes." "Mistakes." Mark's laugh was bitter. "The only mistake I made was not killing you two back then. Dad always loved you more, always gave you everything, and I was supposed to just accept it. Well, I'm done accepting scraps. So you killed Laura, you took my daughter. I took what should have been mine from the beginning." Mark's composure was cracking. The company, the money, the respect, all of it should have been shared equally. But no, the golden boy got it all. Rachel studied the room with the eyes of someone who'd learned to survive on the streets. The toy chest was too far away to provide cover. The window was too high to escape through, but the rocking chair where her father used to read to her, that was close enough. "You want to know the funny thing?" Mark continued, his gun trained on Daniel. "Nicole and I have been planning this reunion for years. We just thought you'd die of grief eventually, and then it would all be ours. But you had to be stubborn, had to keep hoping your precious daughter would come home. Because I knew she was alive," Daniel said firmly. "A father knows. A father protects his family," Mark snarled, "which is something you clearly failed at." That was the moment Rachel moved. She grabbed the rocking chair and hurled it at Mark with all the strength 23 years of hard living had given her. The chair caught him in the chest, sending him stumbling backward into the hallway. The gun went off, the bullet embedding itself in the ceiling as plaster rained down on them. "Run!" Rachel shouted, but Mark recovered faster than she'd hoped. As they rushed toward the hallway, he blocked their path, the gun now pointed directly at Rachel's chest. "You always were a fighter," he said, breathing hard. "Just like your mother. And look how that worked out for her." "Don't you dare." Daniel started forward, but Mark swung the gun toward him. "Stay back, Nicole. Get the gasoline from the garage. We're going to make this look like an accident." "Gasoline?" Joshua's voice was sharp with alarm. "House fire," Nicole said, understanding immediately. "Tragic accident. Everyone dies. No evidence survives." "You're insane," Rachel said. "You can't burn down the entire mansion." "Watch me," Mark replied. "This house has too many bad memories anyway. Time to start fresh." Nicole disappeared downstairs, her heels clicking urgently on the marble. Rachel could hear her moving through the house, gathering accelerant, preparing to turn their childhood home into a death trap. "Mark," Daniel said desperately, "think about what you're doing. This is our family home. Our parents built this place. Our parents gave you everything and left me nothing," Mark shot back. "But don't worry, brother. You'll join them soon enough." The smell of gasoline began drifting up from the first floor. Nicole was working fast, splashing fuel across the antique furniture, the priceless artwork, the memories of generations. "Please," Rachel said, trying a different approach. "I'll disappear. I'll sign papers saying I'm not Grace Crawford, that the DNA tests were wrong. Just don't hurt him." For a moment, something flickered in Mark's eyes. Surprise, maybe even respect. "You'd give up everything to save him." "He's my father," Rachel said simply. "I lost him once. I won't lose him again." "How touching," Mark said, but his voice was softer than before. "Unfortunately, it's too late for deals, you know too much. And he'll never stop looking for justice." The sound of Nicole's footsteps echoed from downstairs, followed by the distinctive scrape of a match being struck. "Time to go," Mark said, herding them toward the stairs. One big happy family reunion in the main hall. They descended the stairs together. The smell of gasoline growing stronger with each step. Nicole had been thorough. Fuel soaked into rugs, dripped from furniture, pooled in corners where it would catch and spread quickly. "The basement," Mark ordered, gesturing with the gun. "Nice and contained down there. The fire will get hot enough to destroy any evidence of what really happened." As they moved toward the basement door, Rachel caught Joshua's eye. He gave her the slightest nod. He was ready to act if she could create an opening. They were halfway down the basement stairs when they heard the first floor ignite with a whoosh that shook the entire house. Nicole had lit the fire. "Beautiful," Mark said, looking back at the orange glow beginning to seep down the stairs. "Just like old times, right, Rachel? Fire and chaos your specialty?" "Actually," Rachel said, her hand finding the silver bracelet on her wrist, "my specialty is surviving." She spun around and grabbed Mark's gun hand, using every dirty fighting trick she'd learned in 23 years of street life. Joshua lunged forward to help, but Mark was stronger than either of them had anticipated. In the struggle, the gun went off again. This time, the bullet sparked off the metal railing and ricocheted into one of the support beams. "Enough!" Mark roared, breaking free and backing away from them. Blood ran from his nose where Rachel had connected with an elbow, and his expensive suit was torn. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine." He raised the gun, his finger tightening on the trigger. Daniel Crawford, who had spent 23 years blaming himself for failing to protect his family, made a choice. He threw himself in front of his daughter just as Mark fired. The bullet meant for Rachel struck Daniel in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the basement wall. Above them, the fire was spreading rapidly, smoke beginning to drift down the stairs. "Daddy!" Rachel screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. Daniel's eyes found hers, and despite the pain, despite the blood spreading across his white shirt, he smiled. "I told you," he whispered, his hand finding hers. "I'd always find you, and I'd always protect you." "Don't talk like that," Rachel sobbed. "You're going to be fine. We're going to get out of here." But even as she said it, she could hear the house groaning above them. Nicole's fire was consuming everything, turning their escape route into an inferno. Mark stood over them, the gun still in his hand, watching Daniel bleed out with satisfaction. 23 years too late, he said, but better late than never. That's when Joshua Turner proved that some lawyers are willing to fight for more than just billable hours. He grabbed a piece of broken railing and drove it into Mark's back with all the fury of a man who'd lost everything to family betrayal. Mark Crawford fell forward, his gun clattering across the basement floor as the house burned around them. 6 months later, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras and microphones thrust forward like weapons as Nicole Crawford emerged in handcuffs. Her perfectly styled hair remained immaculate even in defeat, but her ice blue eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd lost everything and knew it. "Mrs. Crawford, do you have any statement about the verdict?" a reporter shouted. Nicole's gaze found Rachel in the crowd, and for a moment, the mask of composure slipped completely. "She's not even his real daughter," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp autumn air. "DNA tests can be bought. Everything can be bought." But no one was listening anymore, the jury had spoken. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to kidnapping, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges that would keep both Nicole and Mark Crawford behind bars for the rest of their lives. Rachel watched from the courthouse steps, her hand instinctively going to the silver bracelet on her wrist. 6 months ago, she'd been a nobody delivery driver with no past and no future. Today, she was Grace Crawford, heir to a business empire and daughter to a man who'd loved her enough to die for her. "How does it feel?" Joshua asked, appearing at her elbow. "Justice, I mean?" "Empty," Rachel said honestly. "I thought it would feel better. Justice doesn't bring him back." "No, it doesn't." Rachel looked up at the courthouse where Mark and Nicole's fate had been sealed. "But it means their lies can't hurt anyone else." Joshua nodded, understanding in his expression. The trial had revealed everything. The decades of conspiracy, the cover-up that had stolen 23 years from her life, the greed that had destroyed multiple families. His own parents' accident had been reopened as a murder investigation. "The foundation paperwork went through," he said, changing the subject to something that might actually bring comfort. "The Daniel and Laura Crawford Foundation for Missing Children is officially operational." Rachel smiled for the first time in weeks. He would have loved that. He did love it. It was his idea, remember? He dictated the entire mission statement from his hospital bed. 3 months earlier, Daniel Crawford had lived for 18 days after the shooting. 18 days in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and the constant bustle of nurses and doctors fighting to save his life. 18 days where Rachel never left his side, holding his hand and talking to him about everything they'd missed, all the conversations they'd never had. "I want to set up a foundation," he'd whispered on day 16, his voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. "For kids like you, kids who get lost and need someone to find them." "Save your strength, Daddy," Rachel had said, but he'd shaken his head with stubborn determination. "No, this is important. Promise me. Promise you'll help other children find their way home. I promise." "And Joshua," Daniel had continued, his eyes finding the young lawyer who'd become like a son to him. "Take care of her, not because she needs it, but because she deserves it." Joshua had nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise." Daniel had died peacefully 2 days later, with Rachel's hand in his and Joshua's promise echoing in the room. The last word he'd spoken was, "Grace, present day." "The first case files came in this morning," Joshua said, pulling Rachel back from the memory. 7 missing children, ages 4 to 16. The FBI thinks we might be able to help with 3 of them. "Then let's get started," Rachel said, her voice gaining strength. "Daddy always said the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living." They walked together toward the black sedan that would take them back to Crawford Industries, now officially Grace Crawford's company, though she'd insisted on keeping Daniel's name on everything. The reporters followed for a few steps before giving up and turning their attention to other stories. "There's something else," Joshua said as they reached the car. "Something I've been meaning to ask you." Rachel looked at him expectantly. Over the past 6 months, Joshua had become more than her lawyer or her business partner. He'd become her anchor, the one person who'd stood by her through everything: the trial, the media circus, the overwhelming responsibility of suddenly being one of the richest women in America. "What is it?" Joshua stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "I know the timing isn't perfect, with everything that's happened, and I know you're still processing everything, but Rachel, Grace, whatever name feels right to you, I need you to know that I love you." Rachel felt her breath catch. "Joshua, I'm not asking for an answer right now," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. You're the strongest, most incredible person I've ever met, and somewhere between investigating your case and fighting for justice, I fell completely in love with you." Rachel studied his face. This man who'd risked everything to expose his own family's crimes, who'd chosen truth over comfort, love over loyalty. "You know I come with a lot of baggage, right? Trauma, trust issues, a dead father who was literally shot protecting me. I know. And a billion-dollar company I have no idea how to run. I know that too. And probably more media attention than any normal person should have to deal with." "Rachel," Joshua said gently, "I've seen you survive things that would destroy most people. I think you can handle a little publicity." She laughed despite herself. "A little publicity. Okay, A lot of publicity. Joshua stepped closer. But you don't have to handle any of it alone. Not if you don't want to. Rachel looked down at her bracelet. The silver heart that had waited 23 years to bring her home. What do you think he would have said about us? I think, Joshua said carefully, that he would have wanted you to be happy. He would have wanted you to have someone who loves you enough to fight for you. Someone who loves me enough to choose me over their own family. Someone who loves you enough to choose what's right. Even when it's hard. Rachel reached up and touched Joshua's face, feeling the slight stubble along his jawline. I love you too, she said quietly. I think I have since that first day in the coffee shop, when you looked at me like I mattered. You do matter. I know that now, Rachel smiled. So yes, Joshua Turner, if you're asking what I think you're asking, then yes. Joshua's face lit up with relief and joy. I don't have a ring yet. I don't need a ring, Rachel said. I have this. She held up her wrist, showing the bracelet that had brought them all together. It's the only jewelry I need. Then it's settled, Joshua said, pulling her into his arms. We'll have a long engagement. Give you time to get used to running a company and managing a foundation, and give you time to get used to being married to someone who used to deliver Thai food for a living. That's going to be the easy part, Joshua said, and kissed her. 1 year later, the cemetery was quiet on this autumn morning, the fallen leaves creating a carpet of gold and red around the headstones. Rachel knelt beside Daniel Crawford's grave, placing fresh flowers, white roses, his favorite, against the black granite marker. Hi, Daddy, she said softly. I brought you the quarterly reports. The foundation found 12 missing children this year, and 6 of them are back with their families. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves around her feet. Joshua and I are getting married next month. Small ceremony. Just like you would have wanted. Mom's sister is going to walk me down the aisle. I found her through the foundation's database. Rachel's voice caught slightly. I wish you could be there. She touched the bracelet on her wrist, the silver heart catching the morning sunlight. I kept my promise, Daddy. I'm helping other children find their way home, and I finally understand what you meant about family. It's not just blood. It's choice. It's love that endures everything. Standing up, Rachel placed her hand on the headstone. I love you forever, Daddy, and I promise I'll make sure no child stays lost if we can help it. As she walked away from the grave, toward the car where Joshua waited with their wedding plans and foundation reports, and all the beautiful complications of a life fully lived, Rachel felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt complete. The little girl who'd been lost was finally, truly home.